biohacking, performance, mastery, mindset, holistic health. This is a show about getting better every single day. I'm on a mission, guys, to help over 1 million people get healthy and lose weight. Why? Because when you lose weight and get healthy, you have higher self-esteem. You have more self-confidence. And that person goes out and crushes their goals and starts living the highest version of themselves, and then they have way more impact on the world. All right, what's up, guys? I am here live with my good friend, James Geering. He's the author of One More Light, and he's also the host of the Behind the Shield podcast. He's bringing the greatest minds in the mental and physical wellness in the worlds of the first responders and the military and the medics and way beyond that. I mean, he's got over 600 episodes. James, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much. I was just comparing your nice, tidy bookshelf to my absolute chaos behind my shoulder.
I'm glad you think it's tidy. Like we were just talking before we started. The chaos that happens behind the scenes.
Yes.
You should see my ground floor right now. Hey, man, I'm really excited to talk to you because we both have this kinship of being first responders, really about the same amount of time in the business, 14 years. And but our stories are slightly different, and I just love to see where you're at right now in your life, thriving and like really living the highest version of yourself, which I love to see. But it wasn't always that way, right? And so if you could just kind of tell people, how you started. I mean, first of all, you're from the UK, so maybe you can kind of just tell a little about your childhood and like, did you always know that you were going to be a firefighter?
So yeah, and again, I'll say right on the mic, I apologize for the squeakiest chair in the entire universe that I'm sitting on right now. It's an interesting story because I think the takeaway is always don't believe everything you're told. I wanted to be a firefighter since I was little, and I wanted to be a doctor and a pirate and a stuntman. Ironically, I ended up becoming all those, and I'll tell you how in a second. But when it came to the fire service, in British schools, you have an annual physical in the school itself, and they sit you down, they check your heart, they give you vision tests, and they show you the little color test book. And they were like, "Oh, you're colorblind. You can never be anything cool, small child. Now get out of my office." And that's literally what it was. It was like, you can't be a firefighter, you can't be a pilot, you cannot do all these things. Very negative connotation. And so for years, I believed them because it was a person in a white coat with a stethoscope around the neck.
Yeah.
And I truly fumbled my way through life for a long time. But when it came to the traditional medical school route, I just didn't have the grasp of math. So I loved physics. I loved chemistry until it got to where it got super, algebraic. And then I just fell apart. So for years, I fumbled around. I ended up finding stunts. So through stunts, I became a stuntman and then played a pirate as a stuntman. So I kind of checked those two off my my box. But then doing my stunts, I'd met an American girl. We moved to the US. And literally days before I was about to come over here, I was reading a copy of Muscle and Fitness, and it was a Miami-Dade firefighter feature, like multiple page feature. And I started reading about how they were not only firefighters in the US, but you were also paramedics. And I'm like, well, this is everything that I always wanted to be. And at 25, 26, whatever it was, I had this epiphany. Wait a second, I can see colors. What are they talking about? And it took me literally 10 years to have that epiphany. So I was like, all right, screw it. When I get to wherever the first medical is in this process, I'm just going to tell them, this book is not going to be very good, the results, but you name anything in this room, I'm going to tell you what color it is. And that's all it took. Someone just to be like, oh, okay, so this isn't the be all and end all of someone's vision. And you're not either legally blind or 20/20. There's this whole spectrum in between. And so that was really, when I found the fire service. And I believe in, fate. I don't think God's up there with chess pieces saying, all right, your kid goes, pediatric cancer. There you go. That's my plan. No, absolutely not. But I think that, when you believe that if you submit to, a life's journey, it will take you to some pretty amazing places. So ultimately, yeah, challenged the medical. And my first fire department was Hialeah in the Miami area.
Wow. I love just how you didn't stop at, and even how you went into that test saying like, hey, listen, I may not be able to pass your test, but I will show you like how competent I am in my skills. Like not many people would have even gone that far, just knowing that like in their head, like I'm a failure. I failed.
Yeah,
But
well, I
I
think
always
some people would have done it 10 years earlier, though.
maybe I will say this though. I'm listening to your story, and I have a good buddy who we were in the same academy together, and I didn't know this till way later. But he was colorblind, and I was like, oh, and he's like, yeah, you. I didn't even realize like that was an issue becoming a police officer. I mean, I never was colorblind, so it wasn't ever a thought in my head. And he's like, yeah, you can't get in. And I'm like, well, how'd you get in? He goes, I just memorized the test. And you know what? And what you know what pissed me off though about learning about that? I'm like, he was a really great cop, and so I was just like, man, how many people are we like? Why is that such an important thing? I mean, yeah, I can understand if like you're looking for a suspect with a purple sweatshirt or something. I guess you would want to know that they're wearing purple. But from what he was telling me, he's always grown up colorblind, so like he knows like the hues of like, hey, like that's either like an orange or red. Like I pretty much know. I couldn't tell you exactly, but like I have a pretty good idea. Like it's not, I'm not going to be going after the wrong. I'm not going to be targeting people like
Yeah.
illegitimately.
Well, I think, and it's also shades that most of us fail on. Like I can see colors, but if I'm told, hey, the patient's in a chartreuse sweatshirt, I'm going to be like, well, is that green? Oh no, but it's not quite green though, is it?
I don't even know
So
what chartreuse is. So yeah.
exactly. So I'm not a fashion designer. I'm a firefighter. So as long as you can do that, but I do know of one in my last department who was like truly black and white colorblind, and he functioned just fine because there's also guys that are 250 pounds that would be great to smash their way through a door, and there's men and women that are 90 pounds that you're going to send through a hole. So we all have pros and cons
Right.
in our ability, but as long as it doesn't truly get in the way of you doing your job properly, and if you do have some sort of challenge, that you find a way to make sure you don't make mistakes. If it's drugs and colors are used to kind of identify drugs, and if you are challenged with your color, that you make sure, all right, I'm having an extra step in place because I know I don't have that safeguard with the color. So it's just about, as you see in the adaptive community, it's not what you can't do. It's like, all right, how can I safely do that in a different way?
Yeah. Yeah. So you become this firefighter. This is like, a dream come true. You also started getting into CrossFit, and you're like living like the best life, it seems like. But then what happens?
Oh yeah, no. Well, I mean, I think that's just it. There is no best life. I think it's. I always tell people it's about trending. You're gonna have highs, you're gonna have lows.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was in great shape. I prepared myself for the fire service, but I went into the fire service in 2004. So that was when there was no discussion on mental health, zero understanding of the impacts of sleep deprivation. Even the sleep medicine world was still kind of young in its genesis, as it were. So I was totally unprepared for just the impact of the shifts. And firefighter shifts are 24 hours. The most of the departments I worked for didn't get a Kelly day. So your standard work week is 56 hours a week. And then more often than not, this happened in my second and then my third department. You get through that 24 and then they're like, hey, we're short staffed. We need you to stay another 24. So that's 48 hours without sleep. So that was a big thing for me. I went through a divorce as well. The girl I came over with, we had a little boy, and then that marriage didn't work out. But the impact of not the love of the profession, not the actual calls that we run, but the structure and how it's never evolved with the demand. The same as in law enforcement. I mean, it just blows me away that any agency has one person to a car. I mean, that's just one of the worst decisions in the law enforcement community ever made. Yeah, we can get more cars. Awesome, but you've got people twice as vulnerable now in those cars.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the fire service, the job really sets you up for failure. So I spent my whole career trying to learn how to offset that, whilst sadly attending funeral after funeral of the people that didn't navigate that.
Yeah, the amazing thing I found when reading your book was I didn't realize that suicide was such a big issue in the fire community. I really thought that was just a police thing because of the stress that they go through. And it's interesting too, and I'm sure you can echo this. A lot of times as a police officer, and I saw it with many people, and I saw some of my cohorts commit suicide, and it was extremely sad. But it wasn't even as much as the stress that we felt from the people we were dealing with on the job. It was the internal stress put on by the organization. Yeah, so I don't know if you can echo that, but I was also really just surprised that suicide was a big deal in the firefighter community. And is that still an issue now?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the rates, like farmers, for example, there's a high suicide in there. I know addiction in the construction community is so really it's a global crisis. And the irony is it's so bad here, especially if you look at the addiction side, and yet we're the most affluent country on the planet. So there's a real, uh, break there. I guess I'm trying to look for the right word, but disconnect. That's the word. A real
Yeah.
disconnect between those two. But with what's happened in our professions, and I think this is where the next push needs to be, is there was like, oh, mental health is a thing. Let's do some push-ups and some 5Ks and we'll talk about it. And that's got us nowhere, like zero. Now, having real conversations, you came on my podcast yesterday, open conversations like that, starting at the very beginning, layering those, that I think is really what's making a difference, not just on podcasts, just people talking in general. But the other big mistake we're making in the fire service, when we talk about cancer, they go, oh, it's the carcinogens in our gear. And that is absolutely one element. But there's no discussion on the fact that our shifts are destroying our responders' body, biochemistry and hormones and immune system, that therefore is making them far more susceptible to any disease. But with the mental health side, the problem is we're like, oh, well, Joe, it's what you saw. It's what you saw. You had that baby that one time. But they're not saying, well, what happened to you before we ever put a uniform on? What are those first 18, 20, 25 years look like? And then, you have what you see. And then how are you sleeping? A firefighter that's being, made to work 80 hours a week. That's when you process emotions and, your body heals. If that's taken away from you, well, that's a huge part of the puzzle. And then organizational stress. For example, yourself, I serve, this one department for 9 years. And then I'm told I'm selfish and you're taking my job away because I wouldn't take a vaccine. If that's not a feeling of organizational betrayal, I don't know what is. And then you add in relationships. Some people are with the wrong person from the beginning, and that's, separate from that. And a lot of people I've seen, I think, would have had great, healthy marriages, and the job destroyed them. So you add that in. And I was going through a divorce while I was going through paramedic school, working on one of the busiest rescues in Orange County and getting mandatory, which is why I actually transitioned to my last department. So when you add all these compounding elements and then you throw some psych drugs in and some alcohol as well, you've created.
Or how about throwing injury in? How about throwing
exactly.
injury and then you got to take those meds and then yeah.
And then with the injury, people forget. Okay, you get someone who was already beaten down by the job, and I'm sounding very glass half empty, but the problem is the fire service is full of people beating their chest and saying it's the greatest job in the world, whilst we're still going to funerals. So you kind of have to be the voice of the other side as well. But yeah, so now and this happened to me, I hurt my back. Now you're at home, and that brotherhood and that tribe, brother and sisterhood, the tribe and that sense of purpose is all taken away from you, that identity. And now you can't even pick up your child because you're so hurt. That is crushing. And that's a big, big thing, whether it's retirement, whether it's being fired, whether it's injury. When you're taken from that community and you're isolated in your home, trying to recover from whatever it is, that can often be one of the, the real, it pushes over the edge, as it were.
Yeah, you touched on so many things. It's funny, as a police officer, I always would think that the firefighters, excuse me, had like the most glorious schedule. I would hear like these, oh, they only work like 6 days a month, and you could be in a different state and fly in. It just seems so glorious. And now, just talking to you, and actually, I'm working with a firefighter now, and just hearing about the low staffing issues and the mandatory, and I won't see my kids till the next 4 days. It's like, wow. Like,
well, we do it to ourselves though. We tell ourselves that fairy tale. We work 1 day on, 2 days off. Well, a working day is 8 hours. We work 3 days on, 1 day off, and we say, oh, we only work 10 days a month. Well, again, if there's 3 days in that 24 hours, no, we work 30 days a month. So we buy into this BS fictional story that we tell ourselves, and that works against us fighting for a better working environment, because we beat our chests about having one of the strongest unions in the nation, and yet they haven't even addressed the work week yet. So I disagree personally. And I was a union member my whole career. So
on that note, I mean, what do you see as a solution though? Like what, I mean, I know it's complex, but like, were you able to come up with, at the time as a union member, were you able to even come up with viable solutions, or have you offered that to like produce a plan, or is that in the works? I don't know. I'm just curious.
No, it's so my solution is the same. I think that the solution, is needed as far as the nation itself, as far as the law enforcement relationship issue at the moment, all these things. It's getting people educated and angry. And I mean angry in a positive way. Until people understand the why, they're just going to tweet at each other and nothing's going to get done. And what happens in the fire service is you say, well, because the answer really, I think, I still don't, this is not the gold standard, but a good solid step would be to go to what the entire Northeast does, what various individual departments do around the country, which is to go to 24/72. So you do 24 hours straight with no sleep, because I mean, yes, we have beds in the station, but if we get to lie on them, you're not really sleeping. You're just waiting to have the shit scared out of you and go to another call.
Yeah.
But then a 72-hour period to actually reset their circadian rhythm and allow the body to process the trauma and heal from the physical exertion and, train for the next shift. And what's sad is what should happen is people should be like, wow, we're losing so many first responders. As a empathetic human, we need to change this. But that's not what's happening in these agencies. So the next side of the coin, and the other kind of wave of the argument is, you listen to anyone in the sleep world, and I've had sleep experts from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Navy SEALs, sports community, I mean, all kinds of people. And they all say exactly the same thing. You are costing your department so much money by working these people into the ground. If you actually gave them more rest and recovery, you would save money hand over fist from these wrongful, death lawsuits and, workman's comp claims, and covering with overtime with all these open spots and medical retirements. And it's insane. So to me, the answer is super simple. People say, oh, but it's complicated. It's not complicated. I hate that phrase. Most things are not, like, how do I lose weight? Well, you move a lot and eat things that aren't processed. Next question.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, so that's what I think it is, but it's about courage. It's finding leaders that have the courage to, as they say, plant a tree under which the shade they may never know. And that's what we need. If you just want to look good in a fiscal year, we're doomed. But if you actually want to truly be a leader and invest in your people, that is what we need to do, and advocate for what we call a fourth shift in the fire service. So that way you give your responders enough time, because do the people in your city or your county want a responder who's burned out and so tired they can barely see, that's so likely to drive through a red light and blast into a minivan full of kids or push the wrong medication on a call? Or do you want them that are fit and mentally ready for whatever emergency your family's going to go through? And so again, super simple, but we just need to educate people to understand why we need to advocate for this.
Yeah. I love that you've brought up the topic of sleep multiple times now already. And I love that you brought that up, because I work with a lot of first responders, and some of them are on that night shift that we call dog watch or a mid watch. And it's like, 2100, 9 o'clock to 07 in the morning. And, I get why they do it. I was put on it as a young rookie because that was the rookie shift. And I was lucky enough to get off of that. And I understand why most people do it, because they have to commute and they can spend time with their family, have dinner with them every night, and then go to work. And so I get it, but I tell all of them, I'm like, hey, you need to get off this shift. And they're like, why? I'm like, it's killing you. I'm like, it is killing you. And like, the funny thing is, I didn't value sleep as throughout my career towards the very end. And I read Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep. And the funny thing, I didn't even want to read that book. I was like, yeah, why do I want to read this book about why we sleep? Like, of course, I know sleep is good for you. But when the amount of detail he goes into it is just mind blowing. And like the difference between a 6 hours of sleep versus 7 hours of sleep in his studies is just monumental. And so sleep is just so crucial. And I love how you even kind of figured it out. Like, yeah, we need to be able to sleep more to process those emotions. And I know there's some change, at least in the police world. They're even talking about, I don't know how much of that has actually come down, but they're talking about, like, if an officer involved shooting happens, they want to have, like what you're talking about, 72 hours for them to like process it, then to come back and get interviewed because of that. And then of course there's a lot of people saying, well, you can't do that because then that gives them time to lie or come up with some other fabrications. But the idea is like what you're talking about. So it's really interesting. And I think from interviewing all the experts that you've had on your show, you kind of would agree. Yeah. Sleep is the big factor.
Well, taking the exact thing. So these officer-involved shootings that we see, some of these, we can all think of videos where you can't argue anything other than the officer of the department made a horrible mistake and someone died and it's tragic.
Yep.
But a lot of those gray area ones where the officer is thrown under the bus, when are we ever educated on how many hours that officer had to work this week? Especially, I mean, now more than ever. Okay, vaccine mandates. Your prior department is missing. What was it? 150 people? Oh no, who's it? Was it 80?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 80 of us, I think, stood strong. But the reality is, prior to that, they were already in a staffing crisis because the first responder community, and not firefighters, I don't think, but the police officers have been so vilified in the media that no one wants to do it. And so we couldn't even like fill academies. And I was in the training division, so I would see it. We couldn't even fill an academy.
Exactly. So you
And
get an officer now who probably has been forced to work 2 shifts, and they make a horrible decision. Someone freaks out, they reach for what was ultimately going to be a driving license. It looks like they're reaching for a weapon.
Yep.
The shot is fired, and they're like, "You screwed up." Well, when I never hear like how many shifts did that person work in a row? Are they understaffed? Were they trained properly? All these, larger questions. It doesn't negate the fact that there is a victim, that someone passed away. But if we're not having these conversations, we're not actually going to prevent this happening in the first place. So from the law enforcement point of view, if you want less, what they go force on force, or the lethal weapon pulled out, you have to make sure that the body and the mind are resilient as possible. And of course, the training level is high, and fitness is a huge thing, which sadly we, in both our professions isn't always held to a high standard. But if we're not looking at the rest and recovery of people that could pull over a sweet, family that are no threat, and then the next car they pull over is a 3-striker that's going to shoot them in the face, we've got to have that conversation about, if we can't provide enough staff to give officers the time to actually make good decisions, then let's just shut down the whole police force. And good luck to everyone. You know what I mean? It's one or the other. We got to support them, or we understand that it's going to go back to the Wild West.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said that really I think was powerful, I love that you said, is we need leaders and people need to be courageous. And I think one of the things that really bothered me towards the end is just seeing the lack of leadership. And I just thought to myself, like, man, here I am surrounded by people like you and interviewing all these great people and just taking in all these leadership qualities, reading all these great books from the Jocko Willinks and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking, are these guys reading the same books? Because that is not leadership. And that's not what I'm saying. It seems like no one wants to be courageous because they're all scared. And when you run in a place of fear, like nothing's going to get done, nothing effective. And it just shows. And that always bothered me, that here is someone at the top of their game who refuses to stand up and say what's right. And leadership, this is what I want to say. I'll end with this. Leadership is not doing what's easy. It's doing what's right.
Absolutely. Well, I think, and the last 2 years was time for the leaders to earn their money. Simple as that. There's times where you're, playing golf on your, presidential estate or whatever it is. I'm talking left and right. I have no affiliation. I can't stand either of them, to be honest.
I'm with you.
I'm still waiting for a good one that stands firmly in the middle. But and we were like, all right, it's time to, you've sent our children off to fight your wars for 20 years. Now this is on your home soil. It's time for you to lead. And some did. I mean, I'm not a fan of everything that Governor DeSantis has done, for example. I don't think that, making refugees a political statement is very humanistic at all.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what he did those 2 years in Florida was very, very middle of the road common sense. Let's assess. Okay, this is not as bad as we thought so far. Let's open up a little bit. And I can say, being in Florida, it's exactly what needed to be done. You look at the actual real numbers, it reflects that.
Yeah, it does.
So some people did step up. And then other people who I respected before, like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, did this crazy left turn at the end and went full on, psycho. So it's, we're paying these people to lead. I mean, all these political people that you and I from our paychecks are paying their salary. And so when it turned from leadership to tyranny, left and right, whether you're throwing, gas on racism, or you're telling every first responder that if they don't get a jab, they're going to be fired, that to me is it shows a complete lack of leadership, and I think that's the problem, and it's been blown wide open now. And the question that we need to ask now is, all right, the way that we choose leaders, whether it's locally in your police department or whether it's nationally, is broken. You know, for example, nationally, if you have to be a millionaire and zero ethics to actually play the game, is that the right set of rules for this particular country? And if you get to the end and the phrase from both sides is used, the lesser of two evils, then as they say, there's your red flag.
Yeah. I think, and not to get too much into the whole issue of the mandates, but I think, again, when you just go back to leadership, I think the thing that bothers me is the politics that are played in it, right? Because if it was really an issue of safety, and that was what we were really talking about, then that would make sense. But what I saw, and because especially when I was in California and just various cities around, because in just a city across the bay, was like a couple miles across the bay, they're not doing the mandates. And so what makes that city so different? Or in Los Angeles, for example, one of our good friends, George Ryan, well, the difference there is there's 2,000 cops and they have a squad of 10,000 cops. So 2,000 cops file religious exemptions. And guess what? They can't afford to lose 2,000 cops due to mandates. Now, so what did they do? They did nothing. They just kind of like threatened them and made some like, oh, you got to do more testing and stuff. Whereas in San Francisco, we whittled them down. We got down to 80 or 40 or whatever the number was. Screw up, fire them. Because there's just 40 people. And so that's what bothers me, right? Because it's like, clearly it's not an issue of safety because LA's not doing it. But it comes down to, oh, well, we're going to lose a lot of numbers. And I remember even reading an article saying they were going to fire LA firefighters. But they couldn't do it at the moment because of the staffing was so low. But once staffing got up, then they were going to mandate it. It's just like things like that. Come on, this is just silly.
Well, coming back into what you're doing now, this was my stance the whole 2 years, and I think we touched on it in our interview. Prior to COVID happening, as a firefighter paramedic in the United States of America, I pulled sheets over victims of gang violence, over addicts, over just countless victims of obesity and strokes and all these things. So the horrendous wellness, ill health epidemic that we have was there before it hit. And then this happens, you're like, okay, I may not agree with the whole, wear a mask that your grandma knitted for you and you'll be safe thing that was going on. But at the same time, now finally we can address the obesity epidemic because clearly underlying health is a huge contributing factor to whether you have a shitty time with COVID or you pass away from COVID. And so I'm waiting for discussions on changing, going back to really subsidizing local farmers, organic farmers, so we don't have this food supply bottleneck, that we're going to start finally pulling out, not allowing fast food chains to be in our schools and colleges and take soda machines out of our schools and bolster PE programs again. And none of that happened. So for me, you're beating your chest about wellness and what you did completely contradicted anything to do with wellness. You should close beaches and parks and gyms, but you could Uber Eats fast food and alcohol to your house. So that was the thing. It wasn't a political thing to me. I've been vaccinated and I took the COVID vaccine to travel to see my elderly grandmother. But from a leadership point of view, you said one thing and you did the polar opposite. And you wonder why there was a lack of trust. And you asked the two people that no one ever trusts to ask us to trust them, which is drug companies and politicians. So you as a leader did nothing to pull everyone together, and you just stood there while the nation was divided and literally families and friendships were destroyed over vaccines and masks, when the only truth was we need to bolster the health of the US during COVID and then after COVID. And what's happened? Obesity has climbed, mental health has worsened. So it was never about health. I'm sorry, but the facts are there. Now, the people like you and I care about health. We did before COVID, we did during, and we do after. But those voices that would have had such an amazing platform to change the health landscape of this country, to improve the food, the quality of our food, the quality of our water, the quality of our air. And that was completely cast aside. So that was the issue I had with the whole thing.
Yeah, 100%. I'd say the only good thing is that I'm even more invigorated now. I'm even more hungry to like talk about metabolic health post I don't even know if we're post-pandemic. I think we are, but who knows? But
We are.
yeah, okay.
It's a
But like,
distant thought for me, I'll tell you that.
yeah. So I'm even more invigorated like this now because now you can even, like you said, we have the data. Like here it is, 70% of people that did really bad with COVID and suffered, they had metabolic issues. So to
And they
me,
still
this is
have metabolic issues. That's the problem. Everyone that did survive, they're still dying. They're still dying. But like, I think we lose something like over 1 million people to obesity related diseases every year, which is the same as a little ticker thing that we had in the news for COVID. So,
yeah,
you know, why do we not care about those people now? Because they didn't have a virus in their body?
right, right. I want to talk to you about again. Okay, so we've touched on, my 14-year career ended recently due to mandates. Your 14-year career, can you talk about like, how that transition came and kind of what was going on in your life and maybe why you felt like, all right, this is a time for me to transition and pivot and do something else, after really obtaining like your dream job of firefighting?
Yeah. So the universe certainly sent me on a very strange journey in the fire service. And I think ultimately it was to be at, I would consider one of the best fire departments in the States, Anaheim, California at that time. And then one of the worst ones, which I won't name, but it's my last one. And then, a couple in between that had some amazing people. But they were geographically East and West Coast. They went from working the absolute most desperate areas all the way through to the most most famous theme park in the States. So it gave me, the bar was set very high in my early career. And then later on, it was just so frustrating trying to refine that and trying to, lift up crews and departments that I was working for after. But really, the real pivotal moment was there was a time, probably 8 years ago now, where in 2 short years, I buried 6 firefighters, 6 of my friends. And it was a host of things. It wasn't all one thing. That's like I was saying before. You break down the body, whatever thing is going to get them first, whether it's a stroke or autoimmune disease or overdose or suicide or, cancer. And so coming from a background of being an athlete, being a coach, and then being an exercise physiology graduate, I by no means am an expert, but I'm like, well, I understand enough that there's much better information outside the silos of the fire service. And what was happening, oh, you want to be a fitness trainer? Well, then go take this 2-day course and come back, and now you're an expert. You want to be a peer support guy? Go take this two-day course and come back, and now you're our guru. And no disrespect to people that do that, but that's not enough. And some people had a whole, history of training as well, and they just added that piece of paper so they could train their people extremely effectively. And the same in the mental health side. But I was just sick of hearing such great information on other people's podcasts, and none of it was being accepted here. And then sleep deprivation really was the big turning point for me. I'm like, no one is talking about this. I got this Navy SEAL Kirk Parsley talking on Barbell Shrugged. It's blowing my mind. It's everything that we're suffering from. Where's this conversation? So I started the podcast 6 years ago, Behind the Shield, and literally, hunched over a table in my son's bedroom, and went from 1 play to 2 play to whatever. Well, 2 years later, it grew to the point where I'm like, wow, I mean, this is, thousands of people listening by that point. And this last department, I had swum upstream so hard trying to make positive, changes. And it was just sit down, shut up. We don't want to hear it. We don't have a problem. And sadly, one day the news will show that they do have a problem, and it's, heartbreaking, but that's for another day. So I had just torn a meniscus, and I was just rehabbing, got back to full duty, and was about to go back. And I said to my wife, I'm like, what if I didn't? What if I went all in on this podcast now? Because I can run one call on a rescue, that the fire ambulance, or on an engine or a truck, one call at a time. 80% of our calls aren't real emergencies anyway. So, of that 20%, I'm actually probably making a difference. I mean, I'm always kind and compassionate, and I hope it's a good experience for the people, but did they need lights and sirens? No.
Yeah.
And so when you put it into that context, you're like, I'm having, the Green Berets call it force multiplier. I'm a force multiplier with this. I'm able to circumnavigate these silos from all these different departments and make them talk to each other, make them listen to each other. And so my wife, bless her heart, was like terrified, and she's like, let's do it. And so that was really it. So I transitioned out, like I said, no medical retirement. I was rehabbed again through movement, and not so. I mean, I had surgery on the meniscus, had to have it snipped, but I rehabbed myself back to full duty, and then just cashed out my retirement. I'm like, I don't care about the money. I know
Mm,
you had a similar conversation,
yeah.
and I just paid myself a salary for a year and a half. That's all I had in there. And then fingers crossed, I'll be able to figure out the money side on the other end. And that was it. And ever since then, the autonomy, as we discussed in our conversation, was so liberating. The day I did that, the weight literally came off my shoulders. Last night I'm lying in my bed going, there's no tone's going to go off. And this is 4 years later. I'm still like, wow, I can sleep without being woken up. So yeah, it was amazing. But the mission hasn't changed. And this is what we talked about yesterday. The identity side is a struggle. Like I volunteered for a very, very short time because I didn't want to let go of the uniform. And then one day I'm like, what am I doing? This is just for me now. I'm not really adding value to this department I'm riding along with.
Yeah.
But the mission is the same. Like I still want to make the world better, which is why I was so angry in COVID, because people were saying they wanted to, but they didn't walk the walk, So, and here we are now. Now we're talking about monkeypox and Ukraine and other shit. And I still want to stop people from dying. I still want to stop the suicides and the overdoses and the homelessness and the prostitution and all these things that, are kind of not even given a second thought now.
Oh man, dude, I got chills just listening to you say that. I kind of teared up a little bit just hearing, because your story is really exactly where I'm at, right? I mean, the exact same thing, and that same conversation happened with my wife and in October of last year, and I could have easily gotten hired somewhere else here in Idaho and started working for another department because there are no mandates here. And it just, the thought was, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the sign to go all in the podcast and in the coaching business that I had been building on the side anyways. And I felt like it was just a sign. We talk about like a God or source or just manifestation, just aligning. Everything was just aligning. And I just felt like, man, I don't even know if this is right. This is scary. I'm with you. I'm like pulling out my retirement money to survive here, but I just feel like this is what's right. And like, this is the difference that I can make more of a difference doing this than as an officer. So I love your story. That just gives me, just listening to it, just gives me even more hope and just seeing what you've been able to accomplish. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, just to jump in again, I think what we did before was reactive. That, for example, addict is already deep in their journey, and now they're, they just carjack someone or whatever it is. They're so far down that your only option really is to arrest them, or whatever it is. For me,
yeah,
the person is so far gone that I'm working CPR on them, sticking the tube down their throat, and then shocking them. And, more often than not, putting a sheet over their body. Actually, not more often than not. I never ever brought someone back from cardiac arrest in 14 years. So I was the black cloud, So you talk about, imposter syndrome and guilt, but that's just the way, some people, when they're dying, it's not irreversible, it's too late. So with the coaching, as far as what I do in CrossFit and with the podcast, your goal is to try and, if not stop, prolong them from ever getting to that point, So I think what we did before was reactive. What we're doing now is proactive.
Yeah. I love that. I love that way of looking at things. I'm curious because I think there's also a lot of first responders like us, and I'm just curious, would there be any advice for those that, that just aren't being fulfilled in their job and they want to transition to, or they're in the process? Is there any advice that you would give them? Yeah, is there any, knowing that everything that and that you've gone through that and that you're there and that you're doing very successful, I'm just curious, like what would you say to some of these folks?
I think, and this whole conversation, by the way, applies to so many other things like shift work. How many people are up in a factory? And I think what's exciting about AI and robotics and things is that hopefully we can stop most humans from being awake at night. And then people like you and I have to be, we give them more rest and recovery. But if you separate, firstly, are you ready to transition out because of, things that are making you unhappy? Can you reverse those? Whether can you, for example, if you still really want to be a firefighter, I work for 4 agencies. Like I called myself a fire gypsy. I was bouncing around all over the place.
Yeah, you were.
And, and the second one was definitely my dream crew, but having a little boy, my ex wanted to move back to the East Coast. And I literally sobbed when I left. I cried my heart out. That was an amazing department, amazing crew at that time. But, one retired, another one hurt his back, and it wouldn't have been the same, years later. But so firstly, if you love that profession so much, can you change something? Is it your health? Can you, go through your coaching? Can you lose some weight? Can you address your mental health? Can you go to counseling, go to a retreat, take, psychedelics, whatever it is, and process some things? And would you be happy where you're at? But that feeling that you're trapped, and I did a post recently, and it was something about, how amazing it is to wake up next to my wife, which I don't at the moment. She's in med school, but usually, and then,
Hey, by the way, that's going to be a lot of shift work. I mean, is she not listening to your podcast?
No, she's going to be an optometrist, so no
Okay.
shifts for her. No,
Okay,
she's
good.
just checking
Good,
eyes
good,
9
good.
to 5.
Okay, good.
So, but and it was amazing, and then people kept commenting, that's amazing, so excited, only 5 years left, only 10 years left, and I responded, I'm like, no, you could stop today if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And the problem is there's a desire to serve, a desire to help, desire to be there on someone's worst day that drives you into the profession. But what happens is when you get in the profession, you're like, okay, so here's this thing called pension, here's this thing called drop, here's this, and you're like, oh, so I have to stay for 20 years or 25 years. And then we have this mentality, if you stop early, you're like, oh, why did you quit? And I always tell people, if you met a veteran that served, 4, 8, 12 years, would you tell them, why did you quit? Why didn't you stay for 20? With the mentality in the first responder profession is so distorted. If you serve for 2 years in uniform, kudos to you, 4, 10, 20, whatever it is. But if you get to a point where you just know, like, you dread going to work, you miss the hell out of your kids, you're tired of missing birthdays and sports games and all these things, these pivotal moments in your children's growth that you'll never be able to get back. Understand, and this is where there's no conversation, the alternative is not going to be a grumpy instructor at a fire academy or work in security, as we discussed with your dad. The skill set that you have of being someone who shows up when someone presses 3 numbers on a phone as a last resort is incredible. And the different ways to serve your community outside of a uniform are innumerable. They really are. You just got to figure out what it is you love to do and what you would want to do next. And then, as we talked about courage and leadership, it's your own leadership. It's your own family's leadership. And it's fear that keeps you in for 20, 25 years. And, it's the benefits. Well, you never dreamed of benefits when you were in fire academy. You weren't, running upstairs going, oh, can't wait for my drop year. I'm going to crush the overtime that year and get my average up. No, you're thinking about going into burning buildings and pulling people out. So to me, when it shifts from the job to the benefits, that's when you really need to ask yourself, should I be in a profession where I'm counting down days? Now, you can, have bad days, of course, but they're literally apps people show me all the time, only 7 years left.
Yep.
And I'm like, dude, just how about no? That's 7 years. Let's say you, as a responder, you only live to 70. That's a 10th of your entire lifespan that you're wishing away. So I think it's just having the courage and the imagination to go, that's one profession out of, tens of thousands. What else would I want to do? I'm an artist, I'm a carpenter, I'm a mechanic, I'm whatever. Let me do this. And then as a service point, maybe I'll, fix families that can't afford it. I'll do some pro bono work on the side, or, whatever it is. So health coaching and, regular. I'm going to teach a free class at CrossFit for first responders. Hardly any of them show up, and that's a whole separate conversation, but it's there for local first responders if they want it. So yeah, I think that's the big thing is, are you happy? And if you're not happy, are you simply staying because the illusion of security from these benefits? And if you could control alt delete, having been satisfied with what you've done as far as a service for your community in uniform, what would you do tomorrow? And I think that's a big question that most people don't ask. It's just pension, and then I'm just going to go play golf till I die. And I don't think that's a very inspirational or service-oriented game plan.
I love the way you outlined that and brought that home. Yeah, you're right. Without and we've seen that so much. We were talking about yesterday on your podcast. We see so much with just first responders retiring and dying like within 2 months of the retirement because there was no plan in action afterwards. Their purpose was taken away from them. Their identity, I am this, for all these years, and then it gets taken away from them. And when they have no plan, we see that happen a lot. So that's really great. I love how you also mentioned, like, yeah, when you're running up those stairs, you didn't have this idea about pension. And it's so true. I remember in the police academy, or even just afterwards, I'm like, man, I just assumed as police officers, you're just on the street all the time, especially in Oakland. I'm just like, I guess this is where I'm at like the rest of my life. I didn't know you could work in an office. And then I got into the training division, and I would meet these new recruits at the time. And people were telling me, oh, so-and-so is already planning she can't wait to get out of the academy so she can get into the internal affairs division. And I'm like, how did you even know that was an option? Like, I didn't know. I just assumed you were in a uniform for like most of your career. So it's funny sometimes the mentality, and I think people's mentality are in the wrong space already when they're coming into the job. And then there's those of us that just all we want to do is run upstairs and kick down doors and help people. So
absolutely.
I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, and you got to run. You've got some meeting with the Queen of England or something like that. I don't know. But I just wanted to ask, any exciting projects that you're working on right now?
Yeah. So the first book that I wrote, One More Light, was a nonfiction, and it just it's not a biography, but it pulls stories from my life and career. And then there's a takeaway, a wellness takeaway from each one. And that's fantastic. But as you probably know, I think most of us that read nonfiction, that's a pretty small group of the population. So you're missing a lot of eyeballs and ear holes. So I'm writing a second book, and it's going to be fiction this time. And in, again, pipe dream world, I would love to be able to write this story in a way that maybe one day it would be on Amazon or in the films. Because if you think about, especially in television, in the fire service, it's either comedy or it's almost like soap opera type stuff. No one's really made a good fire service show. I think Rescue Me got close to the first season or two, maybe, and then it just went, crazy town after that. But what we see through a first responder's lens is so unique. And if people, I think, could see through our eyes, it would reframe the way they look at so many things, including, wellness, mental health, etc. So that's a big thing. I'm actually taking a trip to France, England and France, in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to stand in the place. I'm going to be very, very. I'm not going to describe it too much. I'm going to stand in the place that's going to be the origin story of this fictional book, but ultimately the protagonist will be a firefighter.
Wow.
The other thing that I want to give some airtime to, I'm part of a thing called 7X. There's a friend of mine, Ryan Parrott, who's a Navy SEAL. When he transitioned out, he himself was blown up in a Humvee, but escaped relatively unscathed. I mean, some TBI and stuff, but nothing horrendous. But he met a soldier who'd been really badly burned. And in the conversation, he's very, very scarred. And he's like, is this the best surgery that's out there for you? And he's like, well, it's what the VA said they could do. So he started a nonprofit called Sons of the Flag to basically bring the highest level of care in the US to our burned first responders and military. Well, 3 years ago, his Ryan's sniper partner, took his own life. And so David Metcalf. And so that kind of shifted his focus to an additional kind of mission, which is the wellness mental health crisis. And so we're doing a thing called 7X, which is why, yes, I do have a conversation with someone in the office of one of the members of the royal family to try and get their support and involvement. But they've been studying the preparation for a thing called 7X. So for like 8 months, they're ramping these men up. It's a team of Ryan, Navy SEAL, and then 3 Delta operators. And then there's also some high-level triathletes in there and some world-class base jumpers and skydivers. And then in February, I get to go with them and kind of document this thing, which is incredible. They're going to do 7 skydives, 7 marathons, and 7 swims in 7 continents in 7 days. So it starts in Antarctica and all the way through. London is going to be one of them, which is the big one I'm kind of getting everyone fired up for. But that's not just a standalone shiny object. Then they're going to take all the data. That's going to beat the hell out of them. So then they're going to work out what helps to reboot, to revamp them, to get them back mentally and physically. And all this data is then going to create a manual which will be available to military, first responders, all those. And then the funds from that and then the docuseries that we're going to make is going to go back into Sons of the Flag, but also handpicked charities from all these continents that we visited along the way. So in the UK, for example, Reorg and the Royal British Legion are the 2 at the moment. I think there's going to be a third one as well. But so it's not like charitable fundraiser. This is an ongoing thing that's going to bring information on how to improve your physical health and your mental health, and how holistically the whole human being, can prepare for a career in uniform, stay healthy during it, and most importantly, transition out to whatever's next.
Wow. That is amazing. I'm super excited about that. Okay. Very cool. I'm gonna have to keep updated on that and see how that progresses, because that is that's very exciting. And then the fictional book slash movie, wow, a lot of
Yeah,
things
we'll see.
happening. Very
I've been
neat.
shooting for the stars, but
I mean, why not? I mean, look where you're at right now, right? Because you did shoot for the stars, so I know it'll happen. It just when it's just a matter of time, right? So
I hope so. Yeah, if I can write it the way that it is in my head, to the point where it's articulated and the characters interact and you're taken for the ride. I hope it would be the kind of show or film that people walk away not going, "Oh, that was really good," but I'd never thought of it that way. And maybe
yeah,
they start looking at all these different people in their community differently, and maybe even roll up their sleeves and start being part of the solution. So very
yeah.
cryptic, but you'll see, 6 months, a year from now, it'll all make sense.
No, I love that, and I think you're on the right path, because I always felt like there was always so much judgment, at least with law enforcement, and when I would get to talk to people, they're like, "You're so different," and I'm like, Yeah, I'm just a normal guy, but I happen to just be in this uniform. Like, I'm just like you, by the way. We're the same. We're one. I'm just happen to be in a uniform." And a lot of times, as first responders, I know as police, and sometimes even myself, I don't do a good job of subordinating my ego and just kind of keeping it low, because there's some officer safety and things that have to be in check. But for the most part, I really practiced that, and I think that helped me along the way of just being able to relate and talk to people, and that was a huge difference, I know, in my career, and people they could relate to me. So, but if people could only understand that more and more, that we're all the same, really.
Yeah.
I wish they would know that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
Um,
it's a no-brainer. You take a step back, it's literally a human being in clothing. That's
that's
it.
it.
So, but we do lose that. We get this two-dimensional facade of masculinity, or soldier or police officer, and
Yep.
yeah, and there's rotten apples in every profession, but
Yep.
that's not the
100%.
majority.
Yeah, agreed. I want to jump into some lightning round questions, but before I did, anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
No, not really. Just I didn't say. So if you want to follow this project, it's called 7x.project. I think at 7x.project, and the
Okay.
website is americanextreme.com for that one I was talking about.
Okay, cool. I'll put that in the show notes. AmericanExtreme.com. Awesome. Um, all right. I'm just curious, man. There's some lightning round questions, and we'll wrap it up. I'm curious. Were there any choices that you made, or a choice that you made in your life that you think made you who you are today?
I can't think of one, but I can tell you now, there was a time when I made the decision to go on an exchange program where English students go and work in American summer camps. And I remember, I can still see it now in my mind. It was in a college library, and I'm there with a piece of paper, and it was basically, do I send this or do I not? And that led me to so many different things. So it's not so much that was the pivotal moment, but always say yes. You can always say, I don't want to actually after all, but what have you got to lose? Take that leap of faith. I think, we talk about autonomy. I don't think that kind of you can be anything mentality that I was raised in is still there anymore. So I think we need to light the fire on, especially our youth, to be like, no, you literally, I mean, we've shown now anyone can be the president. The last two that we've seen, that's a clear thing.
Yeah.
So no, but genuinely, being positive, like, why not you? So if you're in the fire service or in law enforcement right now, and you've always wanted to be an amazing ceramic artist, get back into the clay. And if you get to the point where people love your stuff, make the jump. And if you're in high school and you'd always wanted to be an astronaut, find out how to be an astronaut. Go be an astronaut. Even if you don't make it onto a shuttle, which I think most people don't anyway, you might find yourself in some position in NASA or not GovX, SpaceX,
Yeah.
or GovX.
GovX, you get 30% off, guys.
Yeah, there we go.
It's
it's going to take you somewhere. So yeah, just having the courage to say, why not me? I think that's a hard thing, because a lot of us think that other people are better, and that's not. That imposter syndrome is in every single one of us.
I love that. Yeah. I'm curious, you've had a lot of experts and people on your shows, and maybe not even people on your shows, but just people that you read about, and that, or just friends and influencers that you've met, is there anybody like in just the health, wellness, or first responder community that inspires you that you follow?
Like you said, it's so many.
Yeah.
There's really not one. I mean, if I talk about, I'll talk about one person because they truly saved my career. There's Dr. Eric Goodman, who has a thing called foundation training, which
I
is
did.
a
I
moving
did want to ask you about that. That's funny. Okay.
Yeah, no, he is incredible. I mean, his work. I mean, here we are now. We're both sitting down. I'm hunched over a microphone. His work basically undoes all the damage of modern life. And I had this horrendous back injury, the same one that I've seen my friends have surgery after surgery after surgery.
Is this an L4, L5? Just curious.
It was, yeah, it was right
Yeah.
around there.
Yep. That's the one.
And tore it to the point where when they did the assessment, one of my vertebrae would actually spin laterally. So it was a pretty bad injury. And that was foundation training and some other things, but foundation training ultimately was the real pivotal thing. So him and then another guy, Julian Pinot, who's a mad movement scientist, his stuff with Strong Fit is incredible as well. Sleds and sandbags and all the kind of crazy rabbit holes that he goes down. But I mean, all these amazing men and women, yourself included. I mean, you're taking all these little pieces that work for you. As Bruce Lee said, absorb what is useful, discard what is useless. So
yeah, love that. I'm a big reader, as you can see. So are you. Any books, or is there like a top 1 to 3 books that you just would recommend someone would read that had a huge impact on your life?
I would say, based on just today's topic, there's a guy I had on the show, Professor Russell Foster, who ironically was referred to me by my dad because he worked with him in England.
Yeah.
But he has just released a book called Lifetime. And Matthew Walker's book is a great introduction into the sleep medicine stuff. But Russell's work he's like the grandfather. He's the one that discovered the receptors in the eye that can set your circadian rhythm. That's him and his team. So he's the kind of granddaddy when it comes to that stuff. And his book delves into blindness. It delves into shift work. It delves into so many areas. And it's kind of, the latest kind of sleep research stuff as well. So I would say that so few people understand the impact of sleep. He talks about that. He cites like 200 plus studies. So when we talk about telling these departments, hey, we need to change, I've been told so many times, oh, is there research? And I'm like, let me just get this straight. Is there research that a 42-hour work week would be better for our first responders than a 56-hour? Did you just ask me that? Is there cameras here somewhere? But if you want research, that is an incredible book. So yeah, I would say just, to pick something different that most people haven't heard, Russell Foster, Lifetime.
Yeah, that was a great episode. And I saw you on your Instagram talking about, okay, I got to check this one out because I'm really big into sleep now myself, just because I realize it's such a keystone habit. You got to have it. Any rituals or hacks or practices that you do on a regular basis?
One big thing that's not, I kind of fell into, but I think is awesome is I walk my dogs twice a day and the phone stays in the house. Now, this amazing community I live in, they've just put exercise equipment around. So now I do pull-ups on one half of this lap and then dips on the other half. So I'm kind of adding that in now, just to move a little bit more.
Yeah.
I love, as you do, headspace. So when I'm really on my game, I'm usually meditating first thing in the morning. Just again, 10, 15 minute guided meditation. I really like that. What I need to do better is mobility. So actually be consistent with foundation training, because the problem is when it stops hurting, you tend to stop doing it, which is the worst thing. And then I have got some injuries now. I think at 48, you need to worry less about trying to be bigger and stronger and more about fixing your immobility, because that will then make you bigger and stronger. So yeah.
Love that, man. James, last but not least, where can people find you and just all the good work that you're doing?
So the podcast is called Behind the Shield. I think the best social media one, the only one I seems to have any sort of interaction, is at Behind the Shield 911 on Instagram. I have the other ones, but they're useless pretty much. And then the book is called One More Light: Life, Death, and Humanity Through the Eyes of a Firefighter. It's funny, I still struggle to remember the title of my own book. And that's on Amazon and Audible and all that stuff. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And then the website's jamesgeering.com, because Behind the Shield was taken. So
dang, they got you. Awesome, brother. So grateful to have you on the show. I appreciate you so much. And yeah, we'll stay connected.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Joel. It was an amazing conversation. And everyone listening, check out his on mine, because yeah, it was 2 hours of awesome.
Yeah.